Hi everyone, welcome back. Thought I would do a reading update, kind of a midweek update. Just talk about some reading I've been doing over the past few weeks. And the most of my attention recently, though, has been on The Power Broker by Robert Caro, Robert Moses, and The Fall of New York. I think I'll just read on the back flap here. One of the most acclaimed books of our time, winner of both the Pulitzer and Francis Parkman Prizes, Robert Caro's The Power Broker tells a hidden story behind the shaping and misshaping of 20th century New York and makes public what few had known, that Robert Moses was, for almost half a century, the single most powerful man in New York's history, the shaper not only of the city's politics, but of its physical structure and the problems of modern decline that plague us today. So, yeah, Robert Moses, I've talked about this book in some previous videos, and I've made a lot of progress over the past few weeks. I have about 400 pages to go, less than 400 actually, and I probably will do a full review. I want to write a review of the book after I read it, and then maybe I'll do a video and kind of do a kind of sum up my thoughts on the book. But there is just so much information in this book. It really is incredible how much into detail Robert Caro goes. And we talk about today about information overload, especially like in the post-literacy age and everything, how we just have information thrown at us all the time. But really, though, in a book like this, though, it's like the same thing, but it's different because the amount of detail. Caro covers so many angles, from the financial side of city politics, the budgeting, and how money works in politics, which can be a really tedious subject, but that's really where a lot of the power lies in politics, is control over the money, where the money goes, who decides where the money goes, and all the various factors that go into that. Really about the also Caro gets into relationships, interpersonal relationships, and power, and how those dynamics work, and how someone like Robert Moses, who was never elected to in office for his entire life. He did run for office a few times. One time for governor, that was unsuccessful. But that's just really just a small subplot and in his life. So there's the interpersonal stuff, and Caro having to do a lot of explaining, a lot of informational writing in a book, describing the layout of the city streets and city blocks, or the geography of where bridges were built and where parks were built. There's just so much detail to go along with that. And I know he interviewed hundreds of people with this book who knew Moses, worked with Moses, and then I can't imagine the amount of time it took, not just to do those interviews, but then to take all that information and then put them into a coherent narrative as well. And the period I've been reading about is primarily the 1930s and 1940s, where really Moses was at the height of his power, where he oversaw the Triborough Bridge project. There's a lot in the book on that. There's other bridges he was building. He's also building a modern highway system throughout New York City, and the cost of doing that and that. So that's a big part of the book. The relationships, as I've talked about, with mayors and other people, and as his power grew, and how he was able to do things. There's so many anecdotes in the book, and Caro has a great flair for dramatic writing as well, where he makes these showdowns between boards and administrative boards and things like that. Really does a great job of thinking about dynamics between people. So I think this book is just so all the topics it covers, from city planning to geography to the power of personalities and how that works, bureaucracies. That was another thing with Moses, how he mastered navigating bureaucracies is such a key part of the book. Just the complexities of modern politics and running a modern city, but also never losing sight of the long-term consequences of these decisions, which Carol gets into as well, where Carol is built, or Moses is building parks, really building tons of parks throughout the city. He's getting a lot of the budget through his power. Money's not going to other things like schools and hospitals. Moses's projects tend to get priority, and he's also not building parks in places like Harlem, where you have a Puerto Rican population, a black population, and Carroll's really building this argument of how the classism of Moses, how a lot of what he was doing was favoring upper middle class people, by favoring car culture and that, and how he was kind of racist, very racist at times in the way he's doing that, and really Carroll was illustrating to us, like I said, the long-term consequences of all these decisions that urban planners are doing, and so there's just so much. You could just spend so much time thinking about this book, and one last thing, I'm also, as I was in the middle of this book thinking about it, it's really, Carroll, a really fascinating critique, I think, of political science, where, now I'm not a political science person myself, maybe that's why I kind of go along with that, but I don't know, I might have taken one political science course in my life, but the idea that systems have a rationality to them, and there's one book in particular Carroll really critiques that was written in the 60s about New York City politics, and how the political scientists just completely missed it of how much power Moses had. And I think Carroll was more interested in, he's more of a humanist, or he's looking at, like I said, the relationships in power, and all these things that kind of go on, unofficially, not officially, and it's, Carroll, I think, is telling us that it's way more complicated than that. This is not a rational system. The system, often people can be counterintuitive and do things against their interests, or get other people to do things against their interests when they think they're acting in their interests. So it's really kind of Carroll mobilizing language and analysis to really try to get the truth of what's going on. And I think as you keep reading this book, it's like things get clearer, but there's also more of a mystery happening as well. It's like there's layers upon layers, and it just makes you thinking about bureaucracies and power dynamics and systems. It's really impressive, I think, what the author is doing with this book, and I think its classic status is well in tune. Now, I don't know much about modern political science. I think Carroll, he's writing this in the 60s and the 70s, and during that time period. So I'm really kind of latching on to that aspect of the book as well. So I'll have more to say about it. Hopefully I'll finish it within the next week, and like I said, maybe someday I'll come back with a full video just kind of summing up some thoughts that are a little bit more organized, instead of doing a stream of consciousness thoughts on the book. But yeah, this book kind of takes over your mind a little bit, where you're thinking about it all the time, and it's, at times, the detail is so immersive, and so you start to feel like you're trapped in a room with Robert Moses and his world. So like I said, a sign of authors doing a good job. So yeah, and just another nonfiction book I read this week. This is called The Fourth Network: How Fox broke the rules and reinvented television. This book was published in the 2000s. This is just a history of the early Fox TV network, which was launched in 1987. The author's name here, Daniel M. Kimmel, wrote the book, who was wrote for Variety and other publications at the time. But like this TV history fascinates me a lot too, and I'm old enough to remember the era of three networks. When you had ABC, NBC, CBS as the big three. And I found the book informative as far as how the TV business worked at that time, and how there had been many attempts for a fourth network, but in some ways there was just room enough for three networks because of the number of TV stations and markets available. It was sort of like three was the magic number, but Fox in the late 1980s managed to break through, mainly by, there were a lot of independent stations on the UHF side of things. In the day you had VHF or like the low number channels, and then UHF or like the higher number channels on different frequencies, and independent channels who would like show programming that was movies and sports and things like that. And Fox was able to get affiliates to show their original programming, and the book gets into some of the early TV shows for Fox, 21 Jump Street, and Married with Children, and then The Simpsons, which would become a huge show, really would take Fox into the stratosphere. And then in the 1990s, the TV landscape really started to change, with cable TV becoming more prominent, and Fox marketing their TV shows as more youthful, and bringing a new dynamic to TV with shows like In Living Color, the comedy show, and The X-Files, of course, is a very memorable show, Beverly Hills 90210, and Melrose Place. So carving out a niche as more of a youthful channel showing those types of shows. And 21 Jump Street for me is always a favorite. So I even have a blog I'm keeping on 21 Jump Street. So the TV shows, not the movies. But anyway, the only thing about the book, it gets a lot. The author is really more focused on the business side sometimes, like what the suits are doing behind the scenes, and all that's important. You do learn about how the TV business works, but I guess I'm more interested in the creative side of things, where how the TV shows are being developed and what's going on in that sense of things. So if you're interested in TV history and how the landscape of TV was changing in the 1980s and 1990s, this book, it's informative on that count. So I'll just leave it at that, talking about those two books. So so thanks for watching. If anyone's read The Power Broker or has thoughts on it, be fascinated to hear anyone's comments. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.